I'm Mary Thompson. I turned 32 last spring, and for most of my life, I've known exactly where I stood in my family behind my sister. Sarah, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child. She got the smiles, the praise, the second helpings in the better room. She did everything right, at least according to our parents. She married at 24, had 2 boys by 27, baked casseroles from scratch, and sent out Christmas cards in September. And me, I stayed single, focused on my career, rented a quiet apartment across town where no one asked why I still hadn't settled down. I had a 401k, a Roth IRA, and no intention of asking anyone for help. Apparently, those things don't count when you're not wearing a ring. My parents, Susan and Robert, never said it outright, but their questions always carried a weight. Don't you want children before it's too late? Your sister's boys are growing so fast. It's a shame they don't have cousins. You're still in that apartment, huh? I learned to nod and change the subject. I used to think if I worked hard enough, maybe they'd finally see me the way they saw Sarah. But the truth settled in slow, like dust. You stopped noticing on the shelves. I wasn't the daughter they bragged about. I was the one they assumed would be fine no matter what. Still, I never complained. I visited on holidays, helped fix the Wi-Fi, brought wine when they forgot birthdays, mine included. And for the most part, I kept my distance. It felt safer that way. I didn't know back then that distance wouldn't be enough, that one day they'd try to pull me in so tightly I'd barely recognize myself. Sarah's picture-perfect life began to come apart the way fine china does, quietly at first, then all at once. Her husband Michael had been cheating for years. She found the messages by accident. Or maybe she was finally ready to stop pretending she didn't see what was already there. When she filed for divorce, no one blamed her, not even our parents. Michael disappeared shortly after. No child support, no apology, just gone. Sarah was left with 2 boys, Liam and Noah, and a stack of bills she couldn't carry alone. Our parents were supportive in words, but their savings were tied up in retirement and sentiment. Sarah moved into a 2-bedroom apartment where the boys shared a room and the wallpaper peeled in the corners. I didn't think twice. I paid her attorney's retainer. I covered 6 months of rent when her part-time hours at the community center weren't enough. I even watched the kids a few weekends so she could breathe. I never brought it up, never expected anything back. I loved my nephews. And Sarah, for all her past glory, looked broken, like someone who wasn't used to asking for help and hated needing it. Still, I thought maybe now our parents would see the truth. Maybe this time they'd understand I wasn't the one with something to prove. They didn't. Instead, every conversation with Mom began with an update on Sarah's pain, followed by a question about whether I was seeing anyone yet. I kept quiet, helped where I could, told myself family meant showing up even when you were tired of being invisible. But the thing about always being the responsible one is eventually people start assuming your help isn't a gift, it's a given. It was a Wednesday when my mother called, "Mary, honey, we have such good news. Can you come by tonight?" Her voice had a brightness I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. I thought for a second that Michael had resurfaced, that the courts had finally found him, or that Sarah's life had turned a corner. "Is it about the boys or the child support?" I asked. No, even better," she said. "Just come over. Your father's already home and Sarah will be here too." I drove across town after work, tired but curious. There was something off about her tone, too rehearsed, too smooth. But I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe for once it really was good news. When I walked into the living room, they were already seated. Dad on the recliner. Mom perched on the edge of the couch. Sarah beside her, smiling nervously. On the coffee table sat a manila folder. "There she is," Dad said, standing to hug me, then handing me the folder. "Take a look." Inside was a stack of documents heavy with legal language and real estate logos. At the top, mortgage agreement. "What is this?" I asked. "It's for Sarah's new house," Mom beamed. "We used most of our savings and some of the retirement for the down payment. Isn't it wonderful?" I blinked. "You bought a house." "Yes," she said. "A lovely place. 3 bedrooms, big yard for the boys. They need stability. This apartment just isn't enough." I looked at Sarah, who gave a small nod but said nothing. "That's great," I said honestly. "The boys will love that." I started to hand the folder back. No, no, those are for you, Mom said, pushing it toward me again. What do you mean for me? Dad cleared his throat. We've talked about this as a family and we've decided you'll take over the mortgage. You've been saving for years. You can make the payments easily. Sarah can't afford it, Mom added gently. She's doing everything she can, but the boys need this. The room went silent. I felt every eye on me. You're asking me to pay for Sarah's house, I asked. Sarah still wouldn't meet my eyes. After Michael left, I have nothing, she murmured. I can't give them what they need without help. I looked at the mortgage again. The amount was staggering. I already paid for her divorce, I said quietly, and half a year of rent. I've been saving for 10 years for my own home. Sweetheart, Mom said, reaching for my hand. We raised you. We've done so much. Isn't it time to give back? I stood up, heart pounding. You bought a house knowing she couldn't afford it because you assumed I'd cover it. Dad didn't deny it. You don't have a husband or children, he said flatly. I'm not doing this, I said. This isn't help. This is manipulation. I left the folder on the table unopened and walked out before I could start screaming. I thought they'd cool down. I told myself they'd realize how absurd it all was, that asking your unmarried daughter to pay for her sister's house wasn't something most people would defend. I was wrong. The first call came that Saturday from my cousin Emily, someone I hadn't seen since Grandpa's funeral. Lisa told me what happened. She said no hello, no pause. I can't believe you're being so cold. Excuse me, I asked. Sarah's a single mom, Mary. Those boys are your nephews. You're sitting on all that money and won't help. I gripped the counter. Emily, you don't know the full story. I know enough. Family helps family. Before I could respond, she added, Sarah would do the same for you. I almost laughed, bitter, involuntary. No, she wouldn't, I said quietly. You're unbelievable, she snapped and hung up. The texts started after that, then voicemails people I barely knew. Uncle Tom Michelle, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, piling on. The messages blurred together. You're selfish. They raised you. She has children. You don't. What struck me most wasn't the anger. It was the certainty. As if they knew beyond doubt that I was wrong, that because I hadn't built a family of my own, I was now fair game to fund someone else's. The worst came from Aunt Carol, my mom's older sister. She called during dinner. I just want to talk some sense into you, she said in that sugary tone she'd perfected. You're not getting younger, Mary. Who knows if you'll ever have children? At least this way you'd be contributing to your family's future. So, because I'm single, I said, I owe Sarah a house. Don't be dramatic. They need help and you're in a position to give it. That night, I blocked every number that had chimed in one by one. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, they didn't deserve my peace. And deep down, I knew something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about the house. It never was. 2 months passed. I didn't hear from my parents, Sarah, or anyone else I hadn't already blocked. I poured myself into work, walked in the mornings, let silence become something close to peace. Then the envelope arrived. It came on a Thursday, thick, official-looking. I thought it was insurance paperwork at first, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. They were suing me. Susan and Robert Thompson. My parents had filed a formal civil claim. They were demanding $350,000 in reimbursement for expenses related to Mary Thompson's upbringing. I read it twice, 3 times. Each line was colder than the last. They listed food, clothing, education. They included a section titled Emotional Support During Adolescence, which I couldn't read without laughing. They even tried to count vacations from when I was 6. And at the end, in plain language, funds to be used to complete the mortgage on the Thompson property purchased for Sarah Thompson and her minor children. They weren't subtle. They didn't even pretend it was about principle. I called the best lawyer I could find. Laura Peterson met with me the next day. She wore glasses, spoke like she'd seen worse, and didn't blink once while I explained everything. They have no legal right to your money, she said flatly, flipping through the packet. Parents are obligated to provide for their minor children. There's no legal expectation of repayment. So why sue me? I asked. Laura shrugged. Pressure tactic. They think you'll give in to avoid court, or they genuinely believe you owe them. I felt numb, then angry, then ashamed for feeling either. Over the next 3 weeks, I gathered everything. Proof of the $7,200 I'd paid for Sarah's rent, the $5,500 check to her divorce attorney bank transfers to my parents over the years, $500 here, $1,000 there. Texts from my mother asking for just a little help when Dad's pension fell short. I found receipts I didn't remember keeping, pulled records from old email accounts. Every line was a memory I hadn't asked to revisit. When the court date came, I wore gray slacks and a blouse my grandmother had given me years ago. I brought only what I needed, and Henry and Evelyn, who showed up in quiet defiance of their own daughter. Grandma squeezed my hand. "What they're doing isn't right," she whispered. "But you already know that." Across the aisle, my parents sat with Sarah beside them. She looked anywhere but at me. I told myself to breathe, not to hope. This wasn't about changing their minds. It was about proving mine still mattered. The courtroom was colder than it should have been in the middle of summer. The walls were beige, the carpet thin. I remember wondering who had picked the chairs, hard plastic, unyielding, like they were built to punish waiting. My parents sat on the left, Sarah between them aunts and uncles, behind people who hadn't sent me a birthday card in years, now here to support the family. On my side sat just two, Grandpa Henry and Grandma Evelyn. She wore a brooch I hadn't seen since I was a child. When she leaned over to squeeze my hand, I almost broke. Then the judge walked in. He looked to be in his 60s, gray at the temples, glasses low on his nose. The kind of man who didn't rush to speak because he'd already heard every kind of lie. My father stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "we're not unreasonable people, but we invested our lives, our money, our time into raising Mary. We're only asking for a portion of that back to help our other daughter and her children." The judge didn't blink. "Specifically," he said, flipping a page, "what did you spend on her education after she turned 18? Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, at that time, Sarah had just gotten married. We were helping her and her husband get established. So," the judge clarified, "you did not contribute to the defendant's college expenses." "No," Mom said quickly, "but my mother Mary's grandmother did, and since she's my mother, I'd argue we supported her indirectly." From behind me, Grandma let out the faintest scoff. Laura rose calm, methodical. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Ms. Thompson has been financially independent since the age of 18. In addition, she has provided repeated financial support to both her parents and her sister." She handed over the file bank transfers receipts emails. "This includes $7,200 in rent payments for her sister, $5,500 to her divorce attorney, and multiple direct deposits to her parents during times they reported financial hardship." The judge reviewed quietly, then looked up. "So the defendant wasn't receiving support, but giving it correct?" Laura nodded. My mother shifted in her seat. "That money isn't relevant," she argued. "We're talking about the cost of raising her food shelter, emotional guidance." "Why exactly, Tut?" the judge asked. "Do you need $350,000 now?" Mom hesitated, looked at Sarah. "To help Sarah pay off the mortgage," she said softly. Silence. Even Uncle Tom shifted uncomfortably behind her. The judge turned to Sarah. "Ms. Thompson, do you believe your sister should be responsible for your home loan?" Sarah finally looked up. "She's not married. She doesn't have children." "I do, and that creates a financial obligation," she said. "We're family." The judge raised an eyebrow. "I'm not married either. Should I pay for my clerk's rent or my bailiff's children?" Sarah blinked, said nothing. The judge turned back to my parents. "Did you financially support Mary after she became an adult?" "We were helping Sarah," Dad repeated. "So you prioritized one daughter over another." He said it plainly, no accusation, just fact. They didn't answer. For the next hour, he asked hard questions, not cruel, but unflinching. Why did they assume I would pay? Why purchase a house they knew Sarah couldn't afford? Why tie help to guilt and guilt to debt? They gave the kind of answers that collapse under their own weight. When we stepped outside, Grandma hugged me first. "You were steady," she said. That's more than I can say for anyone else in that room. I wasn't sure if I'd won, not yet, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one on trial. The verdict came 1 week later. The courtroom felt smaller the second time, maybe because I was finally breathing in it. The judge didn't waste words. After reviewing the evidence, I find the plaintiff's claim to be without merit. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the financial responsibility of raising a child, does not entitle you to reimbursement once that child becomes an adult. He glanced down at his notes, then back up. In fact, the evidence suggests Ms. Mary Thompson has already provided significant financial support to both you and her sister. Then quietly, but not softly, frankly, I find your behavior toward your daughter to be brazen and disappointing. Dismissed just like that. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just stood there while Laura smiled and Grandma squeezed my arm and Grandpa whispered, "You're free." I thought it was over. It wasn't. A week later, I got a call from Grandma. "Your mother came by yesterday," she said, voice tired. "She asked us to release her inheritance early." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "To pay off Sarah's mortgage," she said. I sat down. "What did you say?" I told her we haven't decided who gets what, that the will is ours to manage. "Did she get angry?" "No," Grandma said. "She cried. She begged us not to disinherit her. I didn't know what hurt more, that she asked, or that she cried over money, not me. Months passed quiet ones. I closed on a small house, nothing big but mine. I painted the kitchen yellow, planted tomatoes, adopted a gray cat that slept beside my laptop every night. Sarah rented out her house, moved back in with our parents. Mom babysat while Sarah worked. Somehow they made it work. I didn't call. I didn't write. Then, almost a year after the trial, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line. "Just this. We heard you bought a house. Since you now have extra space, we think it would be best if Sarah and the boys moved in with you. It would be much more convenient for them there. Let us know when they can move in. Love, Mom and Dad." I read it twice. I didn't get angry. I just replied, "I will not be hosting Sarah or the boys. If you contact me again with these kinds of demands, I will report the harassment to the police. Do not email me again." Then I hit send, blocked the email, and made tea. These days, my house smells like fresh basil and coffee. The cat, smoky gray and solemn, sits on the windowsill most mornings, watching birds he'll never chase. I painted the kitchen yellow like I always said I would, and the tomatoes out back are finally coming in. It's quiet here. No voices raised, no questions I don't want to answer. Grandma and Grandpa visit often. They bring pie or old newspaper clippings they think I'll like. Grandpa helps with the gutters. Grandma still reminds me to lock my windows at night even though I've got a security system. They don't talk about my parents unless I ask, and I rarely do. One Sunday, as we sat on the porch swing, Grandma said, "Your mother's still talking about you still telling people you abandoned Sarah." I didn't answer. "Your Aunt Carol told her to stop bringing it up at family gatherings," she said. "Said no one wants to hear it anymore." That part made me smile. I'm not naive. I know they still think I failed some unspoken test of loyalty, that I should have stepped up even if it meant laying down everything I'd built. But I also know this: I sleep better now. Sarah, from what I hear, is still living at home, renting out the house to cover the mortgage. The boys are growing fast. I haven't seen them in over a year. Sometimes I wonder what they've been told. Sometimes I wonder if they'll ever reach out, but I don't wait for it. I'm dating someone James kind, with a laugh that feels like space being made. He doesn't ask about my family. Not yet. And I don't offer. Some ties don't need explaining. Some ties don't need mending. Every once in a while I feel that ache of what could have been if they'd ever seen me as more than spare parts, if love hadn't come with fine print. But I don't regret saying no, not anymore, because peace, I've learned, isn't given. Mary Thompson learns a profound lesson about the importance of setting boundaries and prioritizing her own well-being in the face of familial manipulation. Throughout her ordeal, she discovers that love and loyalty should not come with exploitative expectations. Despite her consistent support for her sister Sarah and her parents, their demand that she fund Sarah's mortgage reveals their view of her as a resource rather than an individual with her own dreams. By refusing to comply and enduring a baseless lawsuit, Mary realizes that her worth is not defined by her family's approval or her marital status. The courtroom victory and her subsequent decision to cut contact with those who disrespected her boundaries affirm her right to protect her peace. Moving into her own home surrounded by simple joys like her cat and garden, Mary embraces a life free from guilt-driven obligations. She understands that true family respects individual autonomy, and peace is a hard-earned state, not a gift bestowed by others. This lesson empowers her to build a life on her terms, finding contentment in her independence and the quiet support of those who value her for who she is.
The funeral reception was winding down when Uncle Richard cornered me by the flower arrangements. Dad had been buried 3 hours earlier, and the house was still full of relatives picking at casseroles and speaking in hushed tones about what a good man he'd been. "Natalie," Uncle Richard said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder with what anyone else might have mistaken for comfort. "We need to talk." I looked up at him, this man who had been Dad's business partner for 22 years but had never quite managed to hide his resentment that Dad owned 60% of Mitchell and Associates while Richard only owned 40%. "What about, Uncle Richard?" "About the future. About the business." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "I want you to know that your father's share of the company will be staying in the family, but not with you." I felt my stomach drop, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean your father left his share to my boys, to Kevin and Tyler. They've been working at the firm for 3 years now. They understand the business." Kevin and Tyler, my cousins who had joined Mitchell and Associates straight out of college with business degrees and attitudes that suggested they'd inherited the company already. They spent more time planning happy hour than planning client strategies, but Uncle Richard had always treated them like the second coming of Warren Buffett. "You get nothing," Uncle Richard continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The business is ours now. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but your father was realistic about your limitations." "My limitations?" "The fact that I dropped out of business school 8 years ago to pursue what Dad had called my art projects. The fact that I'd never shown interest in joining the family accounting firm. The fact that I lived in a small apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and worked what they thought was a part-time job at a nonprofit." "I understand," I said quietly. Uncle Richard's expression softened slightly, probably mistaking my calm response for acceptance. "Look, Natalie, I know this is hard. But Kevin and Tyler have MBAs. They understand corporate finance. Well, you're creative, but that's not what the business needs." I nodded, watching as Kevin and Tyler stood near the kitchen, already talking animatedly with some of Dad's former clients. Already acting like the owners they apparently believed they were about to become. "The funeral was beautiful," Uncle Richard continued, apparently feeling magnanimous now that he thought he'd secured his victory. "Your father would have been proud." "Thank you. And Natalie, don't worry about your future. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe we can find you a small position at the firm. Reception work, filing, something like that." Reception work. Filing. For the daughter of the man who had built Mitchell and Associates from a 2-person operation into a firm that managed over $200 million in client assets. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom where I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls from my assistant Marina and a text that read, "The Singapore deal closed. $12.3 million. Congratulations, boss." I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about the conversation I just had with Uncle Richard. He had no idea that his creative niece with limitations had spent the past 5 years building a digital marketing empire that generated more revenue in a single quarter than Mitchell and Associates made in an entire year. Dad had known, of course. He'd been quietly proud of my success, even if he'd never fully understood how I'd built a $67 million company from what he called computer stuff. But we'd agreed to keep it quiet from the rest of the family. Dad had said it was because he didn't want Richard to feel diminished, but I think the real reason was that he knew Richard would find some way to make my success about himself. "You're doing something incredible, Nat," Dad had told me 6 months before his heart attack. "But you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Build your empire quietly and let your work speak for itself." Now Dad was gone and Uncle Richard was already dividing up what he thought was the spoils. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the reception, where Uncle Richard was holding court near the mantel, telling anyone who would listen about his plans for transitioning the business to the next generation. Kevin has some innovative ideas about digital client outreach, he was saying. And Tyler is brilliant with investment strategies. It's going to be exciting to see where they take the firm. Kevin, who was 25 and had never managed anything more complex than his own Instagram account, nodded sagely. Tyler, 23 and fresh out of business school, was already talking about disrupting the accounting space. I found Mom in the kitchen mechanically wrapping leftover food. How are you holding up? I asked. I keep expecting him to walk through that door and ask if there's any more of Mrs. Henderson's potato salad, she said, tears starting to form again. I can't believe he's really gone. Mom, did Dad ever talk to you about his will? She looked up from the casserole dish she was covering with foil. A little bit. Why? Uncle Richard seems to think he knows what Dad left to whom. Mom frowned. Richard has been making a lot of assumptions since your father passed. But the lawyer will sort everything out tomorrow. Tomorrow. Mr. Patterson called this morning. He wants to meet with the family at 2 p.m. to read the will. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. What if Uncle Richard was right? What if Dad really had left his share of the business to Kevin and Tyler? Dad had always been traditional in some ways, and maybe he'd decided that business degrees trumped actual business success. The next day we gathered in the conference room at Patterson, Hughes and Associates. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table like he was already running things. Kevin and Tyler flanked him, both wearing new suits and expressions of poorly concealed excitement. Mom sat beside me, clutching a tissue and looking lost. Mr. Patterson, Dad's lawyer for over 15 years, entered with a thick manila folder and an expression that gave nothing away. Thank you all for coming, he said, settling into his chair. I know this is a difficult time, but Robert was very specific about his wishes. Uncle Richard leaned forward. We appreciate you handling this so efficiently, Bill. The sooner we can transition the business operations, the better for everyone. Mr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Let's start with the will, shall we? He opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked surprisingly thick. The last will and testament of Robert James Mitchell, he began. Written on March 15th of this year and properly witnessed and notarized. March 15th. That was only 4 months ago, just 2 months before Dad's heart attack. To my brother Richard, Mr. Patterson continued, I leave my collection of vintage fishing equipment and my 1987 Ford pickup truck, both of which hold sentimental value from our childhood. Uncle Richard's confident expression flickered slightly. To my nephews Kevin and Tyler, I leave $25,000 each to assist with any student loans or personal debts they may have. Kevin and Tyler exchanged glances. $25,000 was nice, but it wasn't exactly inheriting a multimillion-dollar business. To my beloved wife Margaret, I leave the house, all personal effects and $500,000 from my life insurance policy. Mom started crying softly. I took her hand. And regarding my 60% ownership stake in Mitchell and Associates, Mr. Patterson continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. Uncle Richard sat up straighter, clearly expecting this to be the moment his sons inherited the business. I leave my entire 60% ownership stake along with all voting rights and operational control to my daughter Natalie Claire Mitchell. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming. Uncle Richard's face went white. That's impossible. Mr. Patterson looked at him calmly. I assure you it's not only possible, it's exactly what Robert wanted. But Natalie doesn't know anything about running a business. Actually, Mr. Patterson said, pulling another document from his folder, Robert was quite proud of Natalie's business acumen. He asked me to include a letter explaining his decision. He handed me an envelope with Dad's handwriting, for my brilliant daughter. I opened it with shaking hands and read aloud. Natalie, by the time you read this I'll be gone and Richard will probably be very upset. I'm leaving you the business not because you need it, but because you're the only person I trust to do right by it. I know about Aurora Digital. I know about the $67 million in revenue, the 200 employees, the Fortune 500 clients. I know you built all of that while letting the family think you were just doing computer stuff, part-time. I'm proud of you for building your own empire, but I'm even more proud that you did it quietly without needing anyone's approval or recognition. That's the kind of character that should run Mitchell and Associates. Richard thinks business is about MBAs and golf games and impressing clients with expensive dinners. It's about actually serving people and solving their problems. The firm needs that perspective. Do whatever you think is best with the business. Sell it, keep it, transform it. I trust your judgment completely. You've already proven you can build something from nothing. Now you get to decide what to do with something that already exists. Your loving father, who was always more proud of you than you knew. I finished reading and looked around the table. Uncle Richard looked like he might be sick. Kevin and Tyler were staring at me like I'd grown a second head. 67 million? Uncle Richard whispered. Aurora Digital, I said simply. It's a digital marketing company. We work with Fortune 500 clients to develop comprehensive online strategies. You own a company worth $67 million? We generated $67 million in revenue last year. The company is worth significantly more than that. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. There's more to the will. Robert also established a scholarship fund with $100,000 for students pursuing business degrees, to be administered by Natalie. And, he continued, he left specific instructions about the transition of Mitchell and Associates. He wanted Natalie to have full autonomy to make whatever changes she feels are necessary. Uncle Richard found his voice again. Natalie, this is absurd. You can't just take over a business you know nothing about. Uncle Richard, I've been studying Mitchell and Associates financials for the past 2 years. What? Dad asked me to review the books as a favor. He wanted an outside perspective on the firm's digital strategy and operational efficiency. This was true. Dad had been worried about the firm's slow growth and had quietly asked me to analyze their business model. My recommendations had helped increase their client retention rate by 23% over the past 18 months, though Richard had never known where the suggestions were coming from. In fact, I continued, I have some thoughts about how we might improve operations. Tyler spoke up for the first time. Well, that depends on whether you want to stay with the firm or pursue other opportunities. Kevin leaned forward. What kind of changes are you talking about? I looked around the table at these people who had spent years dismissing me as the family underachiever, who had planned to exclude me entirely from Dad's business legacy. I'm thinking of expanding into comprehensive financial planning and digital asset management, modernizing our client communication systems, potentially opening a second location focused on serving small business clients. Uncle Richard was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Natalie, where would you even get the capital for that kind of expansion? Uncle Richard, I could buy Mitchell and Associates outright and still have enough left over to fund the expansion from my personal assets. The room went quiet again. But I don't want to buy it, I continued. I want to earn my place in it. I want to prove that Dad's faith in me was justified. Mr. Patterson smiled. There's one more thing. Robert left a sealed envelope with specific instructions for Natalie's first month as owner. He handed me another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting. Nat, Richard is going to fight you on every decision for the first few weeks. Don't take it personally. He's scared and proud and doesn't understand how you could be successful without his help. Be patient with him, but don't let him push you around. You're the boss now. Also, Kevin has potential but needs guidance. Tyler is lazy but smart. Give them both a chance to prove themselves under your leadership before you make any major personnel decisions. I love you, Dad. I looked up at Uncle Richard, who was still processing everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. Uncle Richard, I said gently, I know this isn't what you expected, but I'd like you to stay on as senior partner. The firm needs your experience and your client relationships. You want me to stay? I want us to work together. Dad built something good here and I think we can make it even better. What about Kevin and Tyler? I looked at my cousins who were still trying to process the fact that their useless cousin was now their boss. Kevin, I'd like you to head up our new small business division. Tyler, I want you to work with me on developing our digital asset management services. Kevin blinked. You're offering us promotions? I'm offering you opportunities. What you do with them is up to you. Over the next several hours we talked through the transition plan. By the time we left the lawyer's office, Uncle Richard had gone from hostile to curious to cautiously optimistic. Natalie, he said as we walked to our cars, I owe you an apology. For what? For underestimating you. For assuming that your success was somehow less valid because it wasn't traditional. Uncle Richard, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I spent years thinking you were wasting your potential when you were actually exceeding mine. 6 months later, Mitchell and Associates had grown by 40%. Our new digital services division was booked solid, and our small business client base had tripled. Kevin had turned out to be excellent at building relationships with entrepreneur clients, and Tyler had developed an innovative app for real-time financial tracking. Uncle Richard and I had coffee every Friday morning to discuss strategy and operations. During one of these meetings, he looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I hope so. I know so. Not just because of the business success but because of how you handled everything. You could have fired me and the boys after how we treated you at the funeral. Dad's letter said to give everyone a chance to prove themselves. And if we hadn't?" I smiled. "Then I would have wished you well and helped you find other opportunities." Uncle Richard laughed. "You know, I always thought business was about beating the competition and maximizing profit. What do you think it's about now? Building something that serves people and lasts beyond you." As I sat in Dad's old office, now my office, looking out at the team of accountants and financial planners working to help our clients achieve their dreams, I realized that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or even businesses. It's the trust that someone places in your judgment, and the responsibility that comes with living up to that trust. Dad had known I didn't need his business to be successful. But he'd also known that his business needed someone who understood what success really meant. The will had surprised everyone except the person who mattered most. The man who'd written it, confident that his daughter would know exactly what to do with his legacy. The fluorescent lights in the hospital conference room cast harsh shadows across my father's face as he delivered what he believed was the final word on Mom's treatment options. We were gathered around a sterile white table, Dad, my older brother Miguel, my sister-in-law Carmen, and me, while Mom rested in her hospital bed 3 floors above us, recovering from the heart attack that had brought us all together in crisis. "The triple bypass surgery costs $247,000, Dad announced, consulting the papers spread before him. "Plus post-operative care, medications and rehabilitation. We're looking at over $300,000 total." Miguel nodded gravely. "That's why Carmen and I have been researching payment plans and medical loans. We can handle this as a family." "You can't afford Mom's $200,000 surgery," Dad said, his voice rising as he looked directly at me. "We'll handle the real decisions. This isn't about your feelings, Isabella. This is about practical financial planning." I sat quietly in my folding chair, wearing my usual uniform of jeans and a simple sweater. To my family, I looked exactly like what they'd believed for the past 5 years. Their struggling youngest daughter who'd dropped out of medical school to pursue freelance consulting, whatever that meant. Carmen leaned forward with false sympathy. "Bella, we know you want to help, but this requires serious financial resources. Miguel's architectural firm is doing well and we have excellent credit. We can secure the medical loans. The important thing," Dad continued, "is that we make decisions based on reality, not emotions. Miguel has established himself professionally. He understands financial responsibility." This was familiar territory. Ever since I'd left medical school 5 years ago to start what my family called playing with computers, every major family decision was made around me, not with me. They assumed I was barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck as a freelance consultant, contributing nothing substantial to family emergencies. "I just want Mom to get the best possible care," I said quietly. "Of course you do," Miguel said in the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. "But wanting something and being able to provide it are different things. This surgery requires the cardiac team at Presbyterian General, the best in the state. Dr. Harrison's team has a 98% success rate for cases like Mom's. Which is why we're willing to take on the financial burden," Carmen added. "Family takes care of family even when it's expensive." Dad shuffled through more papers. "I've also been in contact with the Torres Foundation. They sometimes help with medical expenses for families in need. We might qualify for assistance." I almost smiled at that. The Torres Foundation. If only he knew. "The application process takes weeks," Dad continued, "but Miguel thinks we should apply anyway. Every little bit helps." "Absolutely," Miguel agreed. "Though honestly, Bella, this is probably beyond what you're used to dealing with. These kinds of major medical decisions require understanding complex financial instruments, insurance negotiations, hospital billing departments. It's not really your area. I nodded quietly. They weren't wrong about my lack of experience with medical billing. I'd never had to navigate insurance claims or payment plans or medical loans. I'd never needed to. My phone buzzed on the table. Dr. Sarah Harrison, the cardiac surgeon herself. I let it ring. See. Carmen pointed at my phone. You can't even afford to keep it on silent mode. This is exactly what we mean about being professional in medical situations. The phone buzzed again. Dr. Harrison again. Bella, Dad said sternly, it's inappropriate to take calls during family medical discussions. You're right, I said, reaching for the phone. I should probably just turn it off. But Dr. Harrison was calling a third time. As the head of cardiac surgery, she wouldn't call repeatedly unless it was urgent. Actually, I said, this might be hospital-related. Let me just check. Miguel rolled his eyes. Of course. Even now, your freelance consulting can't wait. I answered the call and put it on speaker so I could continue looking at the family meeting papers. Hello, Dr. Harrison. Isabella. Finally. The cardiac surgeon's voice filled the conference room with obvious excitement. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. I have incredible news about your mother's case. My family exchanged confused glances. Why would the head of cardiac surgery be calling me directly? The cardiac wing renovation you funded is complete, Dr. Harrison continued. The new surgical suites, the advanced monitoring systems, the recovery rooms, everything is operational and ready. Your mother will be the first patient to benefit from the new Torres Cardiac Excellence Center. Dad's pen stopped moving across his paperwork. Miguel's mouth fell slightly open. The entire surgical team is honored to perform the procedure in the facility you made possible, Dr. Harrison said. Of course, as discussed, all expenses are covered under the Torres Foundation Medical Initiative. Your mother will receive the absolute best care at no cost to the family. Carmen was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Dr. Harrison, I said calmly, when can we schedule the procedure? Tomorrow morning if you approve. The surgical team, the new equipment, the private recovery suite, everything is ready. This is exactly the kind of case we hoped to handle when you established the cardiac program. The conference room had gone completely silent. Even the background noise from the hospital corridor seemed to have faded. That sounds perfect, I said. Thank you for taking such good care of Mom. Isabella, it's we who should be thanking you. The $50 million Torres Foundation donation has transformed cardiac care at this hospital. Your mother will receive treatment that wouldn't have been possible without your vision for improving heart surgery outcomes. Miguel's architectural plans slipped from his hands onto the floor. I'll meet with the family shortly to discuss preoperative procedures, Dr. Harrison continued. And Isabella, the hospital board wanted me to remind you about the dedication ceremony next month. We're unveiling the Torres Foundation plaque in the main lobby. I'll check my calendar, I said. Wonderful. See you soon. I ended the call and placed my phone back on the table. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Dad found his voice. That was Dr. Harrison, I said simply. Head of cardiac surgery. She said, $50 million? Carmen whispered. I nodded. The Torres Foundation. I established it 3 years ago to improve cardiac care outcomes. Mom's case is exactly why I started the program. Miguel was staring at me like I was a stranger. You donated $50 million to this hospital? The foundation has donated $50 million so far, I corrected. To 3 hospitals in the region. Presbyterian General received the largest grant because they had the most advanced cardiac surgery program to build on. Dad was shuffling through his papers as if they might provide some explanation for what he'd just heard. Isabella, I don't understand. You left medical school. You do freelance consulting. I do technology consulting, I said. Specifically, I develop software systems for healthcare management. Electronic medical records, surgical scheduling platforms, patient outcome tracking. The consulting work grew into a company called MedTech Solutions. Carmen was frantically scrolling through her phone. Oh my God, she whispered. MedTech Solutions. You're the CEO of MedTech Solutions. She held up her phone, showing a Google search result. Forbes article from last year. Isabella Torres, 29, transforms healthcare technology. There's a picture of you in a boardroom. Miguel leaned over to look at the screen. Torres sold her electronic medical records platform to Johnson & Johnson for $340 million, but retained control of MedTech Solutions, which continues to revolutionize hospital management systems nationwide. Dad's hands were shaking as he reached for Carmen's phone. $340 million? That was just one platform, I explained. MedTech Solutions has developed 7 different healthcare software systems. We work with over 800 hospitals across North America. But you live in that small apartment, Dad said weakly. You drive a Honda. You never mentioned any of this. I tried to, I said gently. Remember 2 years ago at Christmas when I tried to explain my healthcare software work? You said, computers can't replace real medicine, and suggested I go back to medical school before it was too late. The memory hit the table like a physical blow. Every time I brought up my company or the foundation work, someone changed the subject back to my lack of direction or my failure to commit to a real career. Miguel was reading more search results. Isabella, there are dozens of articles about you. Healthcare technology pioneer. Youngest female CEO in medical software. Torres Foundation transforms regional cardiac care. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked, his voice barely audible. I did tell you. You just couldn't hear it because it didn't match what you expected my life to look like. Carmen was still scrolling. The Torres Foundation website lists donations totaling $127 million over 3 years. Cardiac care, pediatric oncology, medical research grants. But the apartment, Miguel said, still trying to process. The old car. I spend about $40,000 a year on personal expenses, I said. Everything else goes back into the company or the foundation. The goal isn't to look wealthy. The goal is to improve healthcare outcomes. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Harrison. Family meeting in conference room B in 10 minutes to discuss preoperative procedures. They're ready for us upstairs, I said, standing. Dr. Harrison wants to walk through Mom's surgery timeline. As we gathered our things, Dad approached me quietly. Isabella, I owe you an enormous apology. You don't owe me anything, Dad. You love Mom and you wanted to make sure she got the best care possible. That's exactly what's going to happen. But I dismissed you. We all did. We treated you like family who was concerned about me, I finished. I understand why you made the assumptions you made. Miguel was shaking his head slowly. Bella, I feel like an idiot. Here I was talking about taking on medical loans while you've been running a healthcare technology empire. Your architectural work is important too, I said. People need beautiful, functional buildings. I need software systems that help doctors save lives. The world needs both. Walking toward the elevator, Carmen said quietly, Isabella, can I ask why you never corrected us more directly? Why you let us think you were struggling financially? I considered the question as we waited for the elevator. Because I wanted to know that you cared about me regardless of my financial situation. If I'd led with, I'm worth hundreds of millions of dollars, would your concern have been about me as a person or about me as a resource? The elevator arrived and we stepped inside. As we rode up to meet with Dr. Harrison, Dad said, for what it's worth, we failed that test. It wasn't a test, I said. It was just complicated family dynamics. But we're here now, Mom is getting the best possible care, and that's what matters. Conference room B was larger than the one we'd been in, with windows overlooking the city. Dr. Harrison was waiting with a team of nurses and specialists, all wearing professional smiles that immediately put us at ease. Mr. Torres, Miguel, Carmen, Dr. Harrison said, shaking hands with each family member. I'm so pleased to meet Isabella's family. She's spoken of you often during our foundation planning meetings. Foundation planning meetings? Dad echoed. Oh yes, Dr. Harrison said. Isabella has been instrumental in designing our cardiac care expansion. Her insights into patient outcomes data have shaped our entire approach to heart surgery recovery protocols. Miguel looked at me with something approaching awe. You've been working on cardiac care protocols? Software systems that track patient outcomes, I explained. If we can identify which recovery methods work best for which types of patients, we can improve success rates and reduce complications. Dr. Harrison nodded enthusiastically. The Torres Foundation's data analysis has already improved our patient outcomes by 23%. Your sister is revolutionizing how we approach cardiac care. For the next hour, Dr. Harrison walked us through Mom's surgery plan. The new cardiac wing included surgical suites with the most advanced monitoring equipment available, recovery rooms designed for optimal healing, and staff trained in the latest cardiac care protocols, all funded by the Torres Foundation. Your mother will receive care that represents the absolute cutting edge of cardiac surgery, Dr. Harrison concluded. Thanks to Isabella's vision for improving heart surgery outcomes, we can offer treatment options that didn't exist even 2 years ago. As we prepared to leave the meeting, Dad lingered behind. Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something? Of course. When Isabella first approached you about the foundation, what was your impression of her? Dr. Harrison smiled. Honestly, I was skeptical. A 26-year-old tech entrepreneur wanting to revolutionize cardiac care? It sounded like Silicon Valley arrogance meeting medical complexity. And now I consider her one of the most insightful healthcare innovators I've ever worked with. She understands that technology should serve patients, not replace human care. Her software systems make doctors more effective, not less relevant. Dad nodded slowly. She's always been brilliant. We just didn't see it. Family dynamics can be complicated, Dr. Harrison said kindly. What matters is that you're here now, supporting each other through this. Walking back to Mom's room, Miguel said, Bella, I have to ask, what's it like? Running a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I thought about the question as we navigated the hospital corridors. Mostly it's like solving very complex puzzles. How do you make software that helps doctors save lives? How do you scale that across hundreds of hospitals? How do you measure whether you're actually improving patient outcomes? And the money? The money is a tool for solving bigger puzzles. The Torres Foundation can fund research and equipment that individual hospitals couldn't afford. We can test new approaches to cardiac care across multiple institutions simultaneously. Carmen was quiet for a moment, then said, Isabella, I owe you an apology beyond just tonight. I've been dismissive of you for years. We all have, Miguel added. We assumed that because your path looked different from ours, it was somehow lesser. I stopped walking and looked at both of them. Miguel, you design buildings that will stand for generations. Carmen, you teach high school students who will go on to change the world. Your work matters just as much as mine does. But we didn't see that your work mattered, Dad said quietly. We saw the apartment and the car and the lack of traditional markers of success, and we made assumptions. Success looks different for everyone, I said. I measure mine by whether the software systems I build actually improve patient outcomes. The financial returns just enable me to solve bigger problems. When we reached Mom's room, she was awake and alert, looking much better than she had that morning. How did the family meeting go? She asked as we filed in. Dad sat down beside her bed and took her hand. Maria, our daughter has been taking better care of you than we ever knew. Mom looked confused. What do you mean? The surgery you need? Dad's voice was thick with emotion. Isabella already arranged everything. The best surgeon, the newest equipment, a completely new cardiac wing. All covered. Mom looked at me, then back at Dad. I don't understand. Isabella runs a healthcare technology company, Miguel explained. She's donated millions of dollars to improve cardiac care at this hospital. Mom, she built the cardiac center where you'll have your surgery. Mom was quiet for a long time, studying my face. Finally, she said, You left medical school to become a doctor anyway, didn't you? I felt tears starting in my eyes. Something like that. Just with computers instead of stethoscopes. Computers that help doctors with stethoscopes be more effective, I said. Mom smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since the heart attack. I'm proud of you, Mija. I always knew you'd find your way to helping people. Even when I dropped out of medical school? Especially then, Mom said. You were brave enough to find your own path to healing people. That evening, as visiting hours ended and we prepared to leave for the night, Dad walked with me to the parking garage. Isabella, he said as we reached my Honda, I need to say something and I need you to really hear me. I waited. I failed you as a father. Not financially, obviously you didn't need financial support. But emotionally. I failed to see what you were building, failed to support your choices, failed to ask the right questions about your work. Dad. Let me finish, he said. You've spent 5 years revolutionizing healthcare while we treated you like a disappointment. You've saved lives, improved patient outcomes, and created technology that helps doctors across the country, while we worried about whether you could afford rent. I leaned against my car. You were worried about me because you love me. We were worried about the wrong things because we weren't paying attention to the right things, he said. Tomorrow our family will benefit from work you've been doing for years to help people like Mom. And we never even knew to say thank you. You don't need to thank me, Dad. This is what family does. No, he said firmly. This is what extraordinary people do. And somehow, despite our failure to recognize it, we raised an extraordinary daughter. The next morning, Mom's surgery took place in the state-of-the-art Torres Cardiac Excellence Center. Dr. Harrison and her team used equipment and protocols that represented the latest advances in cardiac care, all made possible by the foundation I'd established 3 years earlier. The surgery was a complete success. Mom's recovery was faster and smoother than anyone had predicted, thanks in part to the advanced monitoring systems and recovery protocols developed through the Torres Foundation's patient outcome research. 6 weeks later, at the hospital's dedication ceremony for the Torres Foundation plaque, Mom sat in the front row with Dad, Miguel, and Carmen. The plaque read, Torres Foundation Cardiac Excellence Center, established 2021, in gratitude for the vision and generosity of Isabella Torres, whose commitment to improving cardiac care outcomes has transformed lives throughout our region. During the ceremony, Dr. Harrison spoke about the impact of the foundation's work. In just 2 years, the Torres Foundation's contributions have improved our cardiac surgery success rate by 31% and reduced recovery times by an average of 40%. But more importantly, they've shown us that innovation in healthcare comes from understanding both technology and humanity. After the ceremony, as we walked to the parking garage together, Dad said, Isabella, I have one more question. What's that? What's next? For the Foundation for MedTech Solutions for you. I thought about the pediatric oncology wing we were planning, the medical research grants we were considering, the new software platform that could revolutionize emergency room efficiency. More puzzles to solve, I said. More ways to help doctors save lives. More opportunities to improve patient outcomes. Mom linked her arm through mine. More ways to be a doctor without being a doctor. Exactly. Miguel smiled. And we'll try to do a better job of paying attention to what you're actually building instead of what we think you should be building. That would be nice, I said. But honestly, the most important thing is that we're all here together and Mom is healthy. As we reached our cars, Carmen said, Isabella, can I ask you one favor? Of course. Next time you revolutionize an entire industry, maybe give us a heads up? I laughed. I'll try. Though to be fair, I did mention the healthcare software thing at Christmas. Next time, Dad said, we'll listen better. Deal, I said. 6 months later, the Torres Foundation had expanded to fund pediatric oncology research at 4 hospitals, and MedTech Solutions had developed an emergency room management system that reduced patient wait times by an average of 35%. Mom had made a complete recovery and was volunteering at the hospital's cardiac rehabilitation program. And every Sunday our family had dinner together, not to discuss my career choices or financial decisions, but to catch up on the work we were all doing to make the world a little bit better in our own ways.